Adana was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went, not just because of her beauty, but because of the quiet strength she carried. Born into an influential Igbo family in Nigeria, she had been raised with the values of hard work, dignity, and perseverance. Her parents, successful business owners, had instilled in her the importance of building something of her own, even as they provided her with a life of comfort. She was not just a woman of privilege, she was a woman of substance. After studying business administration at a top university, she launched a thriving fashion enterprise that blended traditional African designs with modern trends. Her brand quickly became a household name, earning her the admiration of many. Yet, despite her success, she remained humble, believing in love and family above all else. When she met Kwame, a charming Ghanaian businessman, she believed she had found the missing piece in her life. He was intelligent, ambitious, and carried himself with the confidence of a man destined for greatness. They met at a high-profile business conference in Accra, where his eloquence and sharp mind captivated her. It wasn't long before he pursued her with relentless devotion, sweeping her off her feet with grand romantic gestures and deep conversations about building a future together. Their wedding was the talk of Lagos, an opulent affair attended by dignitaries, celebrities, and business elites from both Nigeria and Ghana. Adana had never been happier. She believed in the promises Kwame whispered to her on their wedding night, that they would conquer the world together, build an empire, and raise a family grounded in love and success. For the first few years, everything seemed perfect. They built a beautiful home in Ikoyi, one of the most prestigious areas in Lagos, where they lived in luxury. Kwame's business flourished as he expanded his import-export company across West Africa, and Adana's fashion empire continued to grow. They were the ideal power couple, respected, admired, and seemingly inseparable. Adana devoted herself to her marriage, supporting Kwame in every way possible. She believed in his dreams as much as she believed in her own, standing by his side through every business challenge. They traveled the world together, attended lavish events, and were often featured in magazines as one of the most influential couples in Lagos. To outsiders, they had it all: wealth, love, and success. Adana believed she had found her happily ever after. She was convinced that Kwame was her soulmate, the man who would stand by her forever. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form, small, almost imperceptible at first. Kwame was changing, becoming more distant. Late nights at the office became more frequent, and whispered phone calls in the middle of the night started to make her uneasy. She brushed off her suspicions, convincing herself that it was just the pressure of running a business. Adana had no idea that the life she had so carefully built was about to come crashing down. At first, Adana ignored the little things. A missed dinner here, a forgotten anniversary there. Kwame had always been a busy man, and she understood the pressures of running a business. But as the months passed, the excuses became more frequent, and the warmth that once defined their marriage slowly began to fade. Kwame no longer looked at her the way he used to. His once thoughtful texts during the day became shorter, sometimes non-existent. When he came home late at night, he barely spoke, brushing off her questions with vague explanations about business meetings that ran over time. She wanted to believe him, to trust that his long hours were for their future. But deep inside, a nagging doubt began to settle in her heart. The whispers started subtly, side comments from acquaintances, lingering glances exchanged between friends when she spoke about Kwame. At a wedding, a close friend pulled her aside and hesitated before saying, "Adana, I don't want to cause trouble, but have you noticed anything different about Kwame?" Her heart pounded. She forced a smile and shook her head, but that night, she couldn't sleep. One evening, as she scrolled through her social media feed, she noticed a picture from an event Kwame had claimed to be too busy to attend. He was there, smiling, his hand resting a little too intimately on the back of a woman she didn't recognize. Her stomach twisted in knots, but she convinced herself it was nothing. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe it was just a business contact. But then came the late-night calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. The hushed tones when he spoke on the phone, the quick dismissal of messages when she glanced at his screen, the scent of perfume on his clothes that wasn't hers. Her instincts screamed at her, but each time she gathered the courage to confront him, she held back. What if she was wrong? What if it was all in her head? She didn't want to be the paranoid wife, the woman who doubted her husband without proof. Then, one afternoon, her younger sister Nkem came to visit. She hesitated before speaking, but finally blurted out, "Sis, are you sure Kwame is being faithful? People are talking. They say he's been seen with another woman. In restaurants. In hotels." Adana's heart clenched, but she kept her face neutral. She laughed it off, pretending not to care. "People love to gossip," she said. But after Nkem left, she sat alone in their luxurious home, staring at the walls that once held their love, now feeling like they were closing in on her. The doubt that had been a whisper in her mind had become a scream. Something was wrong, and she could no longer ignore it. Zalika was everything Kwame admired: young, ambitious, and dangerously beautiful. Born and raised in Dar es Salaam, she had moved to Lagos in search of greater opportunities, using her charm and intelligence to climb the social ladder. She was a woman who knew what she wanted, and she had set her sights on Kwame from the moment they met at an exclusive business gala. She wasn't just another woman in a crowd. She had presence. Her confidence was intoxicating, and Kwame, despite his marriage, found himself drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Zalika played the game well. She didn't chase, she let him come to her. A lingering glance, a soft laugh at his jokes, a casual touch on his arm. She let him believe he was in control, that it was his decision to pursue her. It started with harmless conversations, or so he told himself. Late-night business discussions over dinner. A few messages exchanged under the guise of networking, but soon the attraction became undeniable. He found excuses to meet her outside of work, in the dimly lit corners of upscale lounges where they could whisper secrets over expensive whiskey. Kwame, who once showered Adana with affection, now reserved his grand gestures for Zalika. Weekend getaways to Dubai, designer bags, and diamond jewelry. Nothing was too much for the woman who made him feel alive again. He convinced himself that it wasn't betrayal, just an escape. A different kind of thrill. As his obsession with Zalika deepened, his distance from Adana grew. Where he once eagerly shared his day with his wife, now he barely spoke at home. Dinners turned into silent meals, with Adana eating alone more often than not. When she asked about his whereabouts, he dismissed her with a sigh, muttering something about work stress before retreating to the bedroom, his phone clutched tightly in his hands. Adana noticed the change in him, the new cologne, the sudden attention to his appearance, the way he guarded his phone as if it held the world's secrets. She wanted to believe it was just a phase, that the man she loved was still somewhere beneath the cold exterior he now presented. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. Meanwhile, Zalika enjoyed her position in Kwame's life. She revelled in the power she held over a man of his stature, the thrill of being the woman he risked everything for. But she was no fool. She had seen men like Kwame before, powerful, reckless, and willing to throw away their marriages for a taste of something forbidden. She knew that one day the excitement would fade, and when it did, she would walk away with everything she wanted. Kwame was too blinded by lust to see that he was playing a game he could never win. And as he spent more time with Zalika, he failed to notice the woman he had once loved slipping further and further away. Adana had spent months drowning in doubt, convincing herself that she was imagining things. But deep down, she knew the truth. She just needed proof. One evening, while Kwame was in the shower, she saw his phone vibrating on the nightstand. Normally, he never left it unattended. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. A single message from an unsaved number flashed across the screen. "I miss you already, baby. Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again. Her stomach dropped. A sharp pain pierced through her chest, but she forced herself to scroll further. Her heart pounded as she read through the messages. Flirtatious words, pictures, plans for secret trips. There was no denying it anymore. Kwame had been cheating. A storm of emotions surged within her. Anger, betrayal, heartbreak. She felt her entire world shatter in an instant. Her marriage, the life she had so carefully built, had been a lie. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to break down. Not yet. She needed to hear him admit it. That night, she waited for him in the living room, gripping his phone in her hand. When Kwame stepped inside, his face drained of color the moment he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, feigning innocence. She held up the phone. "Who is she, Kwame?" He froze for a second before snatching the phone from her hand. "Adana, this is nothing. You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" Her voice trembled with rage. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and you expect me to believe this is nothing?" Kwame sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's just business. You're misunderstanding." Adana let out a bitter laugh. "Business? Do business partners call each other baby? Do they spend nights together in hotels?" His silence was all the confirmation she needed. She watched as he struggled to come up with an excuse, but she had heard enough. "Just say it," she whispered. "Say that you've been cheating on me." Kwame exhaled sharply. "Fine. Yes. But it's not what you think, Adana. It didn't mean anything." His words felt like knives slicing through her. "It meant everything to me, Kwame. You were my husband, my partner, and you threw it all away like it was nothing." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to cry in front of him. Instead, she straightened her back, forcing strength into her voice. "I won't live like this. I won't be the wife who pretends she doesn't know." "What are you saying?" he asked, panic creeping into his tone. "I'm leaving." Kwame's face twisted in shock. "Adana, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about," she interrupted. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." As she walked away, she felt the weight of heartbreak crushing her. But beneath the pain, a new feeling stirred, one she hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. Kwame had always believed he was untouchable. He had built his business from the ground up, made powerful connections, and climbed to the top of Lagos's elite circles. But success had made him reckless, and after losing Adana, everything began to fall apart. At first, he tried to convince himself that he didn't need her. He drowned his guilt in lavish parties, expensive whiskey, and the company of Zalika. She was still by his side, whispering sweet words into his ear, reassuring him that he had made the right choice. But deep down, he knew he hadn't. His business, once thriving under Adana's steady support, started showing cracks. Without her wise counsel and financial discipline, he made impulsive decisions. He took risky investments, ignoring market warnings. He expanded too quickly, overestimating his resources. Then, a bad deal with foreign investors went sour, costing him millions. His staff began to lose faith in him. Key executives resigned, taking their expertise with them. Loans piled up, and payments to suppliers were delayed. The once mighty Kwame, known for his sharp mind and bold strategies, was now struggling to keep his empire from crumbling. Zalika, sensing the shift, became distant. She was never one to stay where there was no luxury, and Kwame was no longer the man who could spoil her endlessly. She started making excuses, spending less time with him. One day, Kwame returned home to find her packing her designer bags. "Where are you going?" he asked, dread creeping into his voice. She barely glanced at him. "I think we both knew this wasn't going to last forever." Kwame's stomach twisted. "So you're leaving? Just like that?" She sighed, rolling her eyes. "Kwame, let's not pretend. You were fun, but you're not the man you used to be, and I don't do struggling businessmen." With that, she walked out, leaving him alone in the penthouse he could barely afford to keep. For the first time in his life, Kwame truly felt the weight of his mistakes. He had lost everything: his wife, his business, his reputation. The calls from creditors became relentless. The people who once admired him now whispered about his downfall. One evening, in a moment of desperation, he tried to reach out to Adana. He sat in his car outside her new boutique, watching her from a distance. She looked radiant, more confident than ever. He wanted to step inside, to beg for another chance to tell her he had changed, but he knew it was too late. Kwame had thrown away a diamond for a fleeting thrill, and now he had nothing left but regret. Adana had walked away from her marriage with nothing but her dignity and the lessons life had taught her. The pain of betrayal had threatened to break her, but she refused to let it define her. Instead, she channeled her heartbreak into something greater: her rebirth. Her family, seeing her strength, rallied around her. Her father, a respected businessman, reminded her of the power she had always possessed. "You were never just Kwame's wife," he told her one evening. "You are Adana, a woman of vision. It's time you build something of your own." Encouraged by his words, she took a bold step. Using her savings and a loan from her family, she decided to expand her fashion brand into something much bigger. It was no longer just about designing clothes. It was about empowering African women through style and culture. She rebranded her business, launched new collections, and focused on telling the stories of strong women through her designs. The response was overwhelming. Women resonated with her journey. They saw her as a symbol of resilience, a woman who had risen from heartbreak and reclaimed her power. Her brand quickly gained recognition beyond Nigeria, with clients reaching out from across Africa and beyond. She was invited to fashion shows in Paris and New York, her designs worn by celebrities and dignitaries. With every success, Adana's confidence grew. She no longer needed validation from a man to feel worthy. She had rediscovered herself, the woman she had been before Kwame, but stronger and wiser. More than just business success, she found happiness in her independence. She traveled, met new people, and embraced life on her terms. She invested in women-led businesses, mentoring young entrepreneurs who looked up to her. She had once given everything to a marriage that failed, but now she was giving back to a community that valued her. One evening, as she stood in her flagship boutique in Lagos, looking at the empire she had built, she felt a deep sense of peace. She had lost a husband, but she had gained something far greater: herself. Kwame had once been a man of power, wealth, and influence. Now he was a shadow of the man he used to be. His business had collapsed, his assets were seized, and the lavish lifestyle he once flaunted had crumbled into dust. The penthouse in Ikoyi was gone, the luxury cars repossessed, and the people who once flocked to him for favors now avoided him like a plague. His downfall had been swift and brutal. Without Adana's steady presence, his reckless decisions had caught up with him. Debts mounted, investors pulled out, and soon he found himself with nothing. He had lost his home and was forced to move into a small, run-down apartment in a part of Lagos he had never imagined living in. His phone, once buzzing with calls from business associates and admirers, was now silent. The same friends who had once praised him at parties now ignored his messages. Even the social circles he had thrived in whispered about his disgrace. For the first time in his life, Kwame understood the meaning of loneliness. His nights were long and empty, filled with regret and self-loathing. He thought of Adana often, how she had loved him unconditionally, how she had supported him, how he had taken her for granted. He had traded a diamond for a fleeting thrill, and now all he had left was regret. One day, after months of struggling in silence, he gathered the courage to reach out to her. He had heard of her success, how her fashion brand had taken off, how she was now one of the most respected entrepreneurs in Africa. He told himself that he only wanted to apologize, but deep down, he longed for something more. He showed up at her boutique, his once proud posture now slumped with humility. When Adana saw him, she was momentarily taken aback, but she quickly composed herself. "Kwame," she said coolly, her voice devoid of the love that once filled it. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Adana, I'm sorry. For everything. I was a fool and I lost the best thing that ever happened to me." She looked at him, her gaze unreadable. "You're right. You were a fool." He let out a shaky breath. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I just wanted to see you. Maybe we could—" She held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "Kwame, I've moved on. I built a life without you and I'm happy. I don't need you anymore." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had come hoping for a second chance, but he saw now that the woman standing before him was not the same woman he had betrayed. She was stronger, more confident. She had healed, and she had no space for him in her future. As he walked away, his heart heavy with regret, he realized that karma had delivered its final blow. He had lost everything, and the one person who had truly loved him was now beyond his reach. Adana had promised herself that she would never settle again. Not for half-hearted love, not for empty promises, and certainly not for a man who did not see her worth. After rebuilding her life, she found peace in her independence, focusing on her business and personal growth. Love was not something she actively sought, but fate had other plans. She met Jabari, a successful Kenyan entrepreneur, at a business summit in Nairobi. He was different from the men she had known, calm, confident, and deeply respectful. Unlike Kwame, he had no need to impress her with grand gestures or flashy wealth. His charm lay in his kindness, in the way he listened when she spoke, in the way he saw her for more than just her success. Their conversation started over business, but soon they were talking about life, dreams, and values. Jabari admired Adana not just for her achievements, but for the strength she carried. He had heard of her story, of how she had risen from heartbreak to build an empire, and he respected her even more for it. Their connection was effortless. He made her laugh in a way she hadn't in years. With him, she felt safe, not because he promised never to hurt her, but because he showed her through his actions that he never would. Unlike Kwame, Jabari never made her feel small. He celebrated her wins, stood beside her in challenges, and never once saw her success as a threat. He was a man secure in himself, and that made all the difference. One evening, as they walked through the streets of Nairobi, Adana looked at him and realized something. She was happy. Not just content, but truly, deeply happy. She had thought love would never find her again, but here it was, quiet and steady, asking nothing from her but trust. When Jabari held her hand, it was not with possessiveness, but with warmth. When he spoke of the future, it was not with empty promises, but with sincerity. And when he told her he loved her, she knew he meant it. For the first time in a long time, Adana allowed herself to love again. Not out of need, but out of choice. And this time, she chose right. Kwame sat alone in a small, dimly lit apartment in Lagos, staring at the cracked ceiling. The silence was suffocating, a stark contrast to the lively, luxurious world he had once inhabited. Gone were the extravagant parties, the business meetings in five-star hotels, the adoring glances from women who admired his wealth and power. Now all he had left was regret. Everywhere he turned, reminders of his past haunted him. Adana's name appeared in business magazines, her face on billboards, her brand celebrated across Africa and beyond. She had flourished without him, proving that she was never just a wife standing in his shadow. She was a force of her own. Kwame sometimes passed by her boutique, watching from a distance as she greeted customers with her radiant smile. He had never seen her this happy, this free. And beside her always was Jabari, the man who had given her everything he failed to. Jabari was everything Kwame wasn't. He treated Adana with respect, celebrated her success instead of competing with it, And most of all, he never took her for granted. Kwame could see the love between them, the way Adana glowed when she was with him. It was torture. He had spent months telling himself that he would win her back, that if he just got his life together, she might give him another chance. But deep down, he knew he had lost her forever. There was no redemption for a man who had destroyed his own happiness. He had betrayed a woman who had given him everything, and in doing so, he had lost the only real love he had ever known. Kwame let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. If only I had been wiser. If only I had seen what I had before it was too late. But life did not grant second chances to men like him. As he sat in his empty apartment, staring at the darkness around him, Kwame finally accepted his fate. He would live with his mistakes, with the knowledge that he had thrown away a love so rare, so pure. And now all he could do was watch from afar as Adana thrived in a life that no longer had a place for him. It was the cruelest punishment of all. Adana stood before a crowd of young women, her presence commanding yet warm. They had gathered to hear her speak, not just as a successful entrepreneur, but as a woman who had risen from betrayal and heartbreak to build a life of power and purpose. She smiled as she looked around the room. These women saw themselves in her. Some were struggling in toxic relationships, others were battling self-doubt, and many were afraid to take the leap into independence. She understood them, for she had once been in their shoes. Taking a deep breath, she began. "There was a time when I believed my worth was tied to someone else," she said, her voice steady. "I gave my heart, my love, and my strength to a man who did not value them. And when he betrayed me, I thought I had lost everything." A hush fell over the audience, every woman hanging on to her words. "But I learned something powerful," Adana continued. "I was never the one who lost. He was, because I was always enough. I was always strong. And when I finally realized that, I rebuilt my life. Not for revenge, not to prove a point, but for myself." A ripple of nods and murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd. "Today I stand before you not just as a businesswoman, but as a survivor, as a woman who refused to let pain define her. And I want you to know, you are more than your past. You are worthy of love, of success, of happiness, and no one, no man, no failure, no heartbreak can take that from you." The applause was thunderous, but more than that, Adana could see it, the fire in their eyes, the hope sparking in hearts that had once been filled with doubt. She had come a long way, from the woman who cried in silence over Kwame's betrayal to the woman who now stood before hundreds, inspiring them to rise. She had found success, love, and most importantly, herself. Later that evening, as she walked hand in hand with Jabari, she looked up at the night sky, feeling at peace. She had turned her pain into power, her heartbreak into wisdom. She had not just survived, she had triumphed.